The air in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was thick with the scent of money and ambition. Ethan Sterling stood at the center of it all, a king in his own mind, his arm possessively wrapped around his new perfect wife Chloe. He was the man who had everything, the rising star of Wall Street, the beautiful bride, the envy of every person in this room. He surveyed the glittering crowd, a smug smile playing on his lips. But then a strange quiet fell. A single gasp, then another. The sea of tuxedos and gowns parted, and all eyes turned to the grand entrance. A woman stood there, a vision in emerald silk, her confidence a force of nature. And on her arm was Damian Blackwood. The Damian Blackwood. In that instant, Ethan Sterling's perfectly constructed world began to shatter. The annual Metropolitan Legacy Gala was not merely a party. It was the ultimate arena of New York's social and financial elite. It was a place where fortunes were silently gauged, alliances were forged over champagne, and reputations were made or mercilessly broken under the light of colossal crystal chandeliers. Tonight, Ethan Sterling felt he was on the verge of finally irrevocably making his. He adjusted the cuffs of his Tom Ford tuxedo, the movement practiced and smooth. Every detail was curated for this moment. The watch on his wrist, a Patek Philippe Calatrava, was a subtle nod to old money, a deliberate choice over something more ostentatious. His new wife, Chloe Vance, was his most prized acquisition. Dressed in a breathtaking diamond-white Marchesa gown, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, she looked less like a person and more like a priceless statue brought to life. She was 24 with a pedigree from a respectable, if not overly powerful, Connecticut family. More importantly, she was not Caroline. "You see the Ashworths over there?" Ethan murmured into Chloe's ear, his voice a low hum of excitement. "That's Lawrence Ashworth. He controls the largest private equity fund on the East Coast. We need to make an impression." Chloe smiled, a perfect, practiced smile that didn't quite reach her blue eyes. "Of course, darling, I'll be charming." She was always charming. It was her primary function. Ethan had coached her for weeks, drilling her on names, affiliations, and the subtle conversational cues of the city's power players. He needed tonight to be flawless. His recent promotion to senior vice president at Sterling & Finch, a firm he'd clawed his way into, was still fresh. This gala was his coronation, the public declaration that he had arrived. He had shed his past, jettisoned the baggage, and upgraded every aspect of his life. His gaze swept the room again, cataloging the attendees. The Caldwell banking family near the Monet display. A senator from New York holding court by the bar. Tech moguls and real estate tycoons mingled, their collective net worth enough to bail out a small country. And they were all people he now considered his peers. He had made it. The boy from a middle-class Ohio suburb was gone, replaced by this titan of finance. His success, he told himself, was entirely his own. He'd conveniently forgotten the countless all-nighters fueled by cheap coffee and the unwavering belief of the woman who had shared them with him. He had erased the memory of Caroline Hayes, his ex-wife, poring over financial models until dawn, her brilliant mind finding patterns and opportunities he had missed. He'd rewritten their shared history into a solo narrative of his own genius. Caroline, in his new version of the past, was a weight he'd had to drop to ascend. She was sensible, intelligent, but ultimately she was not a woman who could stand beside him in a room like this. She was plain, he'd convinced himself. She lacked the polished, effortless grace of a woman like Chloe. "Ethan, darling, it's Mr. Beaumont," Chloe whispered, giving his arm a gentle squeeze. Ethan's focus snapped back. Jonathan Beaumont, the firm's most senior partner, was approaching his wife on his arm. This was it. The moment of acknowledgement. "Beaumont," Ethan said, extending a hand with practiced confidence. "A spectacular evening." Sterling Beaumont replied, his handshake firm, but his eyes coolly assessing. "The firm is very pleased with the new numbers from the Westfield account. Good work." He glanced at Chloe. "And this must be the new Mrs. Sterling. A pleasure." "The pleasure is all mine, Mr. Beaumont." Chloe said, her voice a soft melodic chime. The conversation was brief, filled with the empty pleasantries of their class, but for Ethan it was a profound validation. Beaumont had acknowledged him, had praised his work in front of his new wife. He was no longer just a promising junior, he was a peer. As the Beaumonts moved on, Ethan felt a surge of pure, unadulterated triumph. He turned to Chloe, his eyes gleaming. "Did you see that he knows? They all know." "Of course they do, darling," she said, patting his chest. "You're brilliant." He leaned in to kiss her, a public display of affection that was more about marking his territory than genuine passion. He was the victor. He had won the war he had waged against his own insecurities, against his past. He had the career, the status, and the perfect wife. Caroline was a distant, faded memory, a footnote in his epic rise. He imagined her now probably at home in the modest apartment the divorce had left her with, perhaps watching some banal television show, completely oblivious to the glittering world he now inhabited. The thought filled him with a dark, satisfying sense of justice. He had been right to leave her. He had been right about everything. The orchestra began to play a soft classical piece, and the low hum of conversation filled the vast hall. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved silently through the crowd, refilling champagne flutes. Ethan took a sip from his own, the bubbles a perfect metaphor for his effervescent mood. Everything was perfect. Absolutely, undeniably perfect. And then the atmosphere shifted. It began not with a sound, but with a feeling. A subtle change in the room's energy, like a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. A conversation near the grand staircase faltered. A head turned, then another. The quiet spread like a ripple in a pond, a wave of silence moving outward from the entrance. The orchestra seemed to fade into the background. Ethan frowned, annoyed at the interruption. "What is it?" he asked, following Chloe's gaze toward the marble archway. The crowd was parting, not in a rush, but in a slow, reverent way, creating a wide channel. At first, Ethan couldn't see the cause of the disturbance. Then, through the gap, he saw her. For a moment, his brain refused to process the image. It was like seeing a ghost, but a ghost that had been remade by a master artist. Caroline Hayes stood at the entrance. But it wasn't the Caroline he remembered. The woman he had discarded was gone. In her place was a figure of breathtaking elegance and power. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk that clung to her form, the color a startling jewel tone against the sea of black, white, and muted pastels. Her dark hair, which she used to wear in a simple, practical style, was now styled in glamorous, cascading waves that framed a face that was somehow both familiar and entirely new. The lines of exhaustion and stress he remembered were gone, replaced by a sharp, intelligent clarity. Her eyes, which he had once called too serious, now held a calm, commanding fire. She wore no necklace, just a pair of stunning diamond and emerald earrings that caught the light and a matching bracelet on one slender wrist. But it wasn't just the clothes or the jewels, it was her posture. The way she held herself with an unshakable poise that spoke not of arrogance, but of absolute self-possession. She wasn't looking for approval. She was simply present. And then Ethan saw the man whose arm she held. It was Damian Blackwood. The name hit Ethan like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. Damian Blackwood was not just rich, he was a legend, a reclusive, almost mythical figure in the world of finance and technology. He was old money from a family that had helped build the very foundations of the city, but he had multiplied that fortune tenfold with a series of astoundingly prescient tech investments. He rarely attended public events, and when he did, it was a major news story. He was known for his ruthless business acumen and his utter disdain for the kind of social posturing that defined events like this gala. To see him here was a shock. To see him with Caroline, it was an impossibility. It was a glitch in the universe. As they began to walk into the ballroom, the most astonishing thing happened. Lawrence Ashworth, the man Ethan had been so desperate to impress, straightened his posture and gave a respectful nod in Blackwood's direction. Jonathan Beaumont, Ethan's own boss, actually took a half step forward, as if to greet them before thinking better of it. One by one, as Caroline and Damian passed powerful men and women, the titans of industry and society, paused their conversations. Some of the older gentlemen pillars of the establishment even inclined their heads slightly. It wasn't a formal gesture, but it was a clear, unmistakable signal of deep respect. The room didn't just notice them, they deferred to them. Everyone stood a little straighter. The balance of power in the most powerful room in New York had just tilted on its axis. Ethan felt a cold dread wash over him. His perfect evening, his coronation, had just been hijacked. He looked at Chloe, and for the first time he saw a flicker of confusion and doubt in her perfect blue eyes. She was looking at Caroline, then back at him, a question forming on her lips. His ex-wife, the woman he had deemed unworthy of this world, had just walked in and captured it without saying a single word. And she had done it on the arm of a man whose shadow Ethan could never hope to escape. The victory he had felt moments before turned to ash in his mouth. The hush that had fallen over the grand ballroom was a living thing. It was a vacuum of sound filled only with the weight of 1,000 unasked questions. Caroline Hayes moved through that silence as if it were her natural element. Each step was deliberate, unhurried. She didn't scan the room nervously as a newcomer might. Instead, her gaze was level, her expression serene, acknowledging the occasional nod with a small, gracious smile that was both warm and utterly impenetrable. Ethan watched paralyzed. This was a Caroline he had never known. The woman he had married was brilliant, yes, but she had always carried a certain humility, a quiet diffidence. She preferred libraries to ballrooms, substantive debates to frivolous small talk. He had called it a lack of social grace. Now, watching her, he saw it for what it truly was, a complete lack of interest in the trivial games he lived for. The woman walking towards the center of the room wasn't lacking grace. She was simply operating on a higher plane. Her dress wasn't Marchesa or Oscar de la Renta, the go-to designers for the society wives. He learned later it was a bespoke piece from a lesser-known but fiercely exclusive British couturier, a designer favored by European royalty. It was a statement of individuality, not of conformity. It was a choice that said, I don't follow your trends. I am the trend. And then there was Damian Blackwood. He was a man who seemed to absorb the light around him rather than reflect it. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that was remarkable only for its stark simplicity, he radiated an aura of immense quiet power. He wasn't handsome in the conventional chiseled way Ethan was. His features were sharper, more severe, his eyes a piercing gray that seemed to see through every facade. He moved with the predatory grace of a panther, his presence so commanding that it made every other man in the room seem like a pale imitation. He didn't hold Caroline's arm. He escorted her. There was a subtle difference. His hand rested lightly on the small of her back, a gesture that was both protective and profoundly respectful. It was the gesture of an equal, a partner. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, a frantic trapped bird. His mind reeled, trying to make sense of the impossible tableau before him. Caroline and Damian Blackwood. How, when the divorce had been finalized just over a year ago? He had left her with a pittance, legally cornering her into a settlement that gave him control of their jointly founded analytics company and the majority of their assets. He had told himself he was being smart, ruthless. He had left her with just enough to live on, but not enough to ever be a threat. He had imagined her broken, defeated. The woman he was looking at was not broken. She was forged. Ethan, who is that? Chloe's voice was a sharp whisper cutting through his stupor. The charm had vanished, replaced by a raw, naked insecurity. With Damian Blackwood. Ethan couldn't bring himself to answer immediately. Admitting who she was felt like admitting a catastrophic failure of judgment. That's Caroline. He finally choked out the name, feeling foreign on his tongue. Chloe's perfectly made-up face contorted in disbelief. You're Caroline. The one you said was a librarian type, the one who couldn't handle this kind of life. Her words were daggers twisting the knife of his own lies. He had painted a picture of Caroline for Chloe, a drab, ambitionless woman who was holding him back. He had needed Chloe to believe that story so she would feel like an upgrade, a prize he had rightly won. He needed himself to believe it. People change. He mumbled the excuse, sounding pathetic even to his own ears. As Caroline and Damian drew closer, Ethan could see the subtle details. Her skin was flawless, luminous, with a healthy glow that spoke of rest and well-being, a stark contrast to the perpetually exhausted woman he remembered from the final years of their marriage. And there was a lightness in her expression, an absence of the worry that had once etched fine lines around her eyes. It was the look of a person who no longer had to fight for her own survival. They stopped to speak with the Caldwells, the patriarch of the old banking dynasty, greeting Damian with a familiar warmth, and Caroline with genuine curiosity and respect. Ethan watched his stomach churning with a toxic cocktail of fury and envy. Those were the people he was supposed to be charming. That was his circle. But the Caldwells barely gave him a passing glance. All their attention, all the social capital in that corner of the room was now focused on the woman he had thrown away. The most galling part was that Caroline seemed completely unconcerned with his presence. She hadn't even looked in his direction. It was as if he didn't exist. Her focus was entirely on her conversations, on the man by her side. This wasn't a performance for his benefit. This wasn't a revenge plot. This was her life now. The realization was more devastating than any public confrontation could have been. He had been so central to her life, the sun around which her world revolved. Now, he wasn't even a distant star. He was irrelevant. Jonathan Beaumont, his boss, began to walk towards Damian's group, a calculating look in his eyes. A partnership with any of Blackwood's ventures would be a monumental coup for Sterling and Finch. Ethan instinctively started to move forward, wanting to intercept his boss, to somehow insert himself into the conversation and claim a connection. "Ethan, don't!" Chloe hissed, her fingers digging into his arm like talons. Her social instincts were sharper than his at that moment. She understood what he did not approaching them now would make him look desperate, pathetic. A supplicant begging for scraps from his ex-wife's new, infinitely more powerful table. He froze, rooted to the spot, forced to watch as his boss approached Caroline. He saw Beaumont smile a genuine smile of admiration and shake her hand. He couldn't hear what was said, but he could see the animation in his boss's face, the deference in his posture as he spoke to Damian. He saw Caroline laugh, a sound he hadn't heard in years, a free, unburdened sound that echoed across the ballroom and struck him right in the heart. He felt a wave of dizziness. The room, which had moments ago felt like his kingdom, now felt like a gilded cage, and he was the one on display. Every whisper seemed to be about him. Is that her ex-husband over there? The one with the little blonde? Can you imagine letting a woman like that go? He must be absolutely sick. He looked down at Chloe. The diamond white of her dress suddenly seemed garish, her youthful perfection brittle. She was looking at him with an expression he had never seen before, a mixture of accusation and pity. She had hitched her wagon to a rising star only to watch a supernova eclipse him. In that moment, he knew that the foundation of their relationship, built on the flimsy scaffolding of his supposed superiority, had just cracked. Across the room, Caroline finally turned. Her eyes, cool and distant, swept over the crowd, and for a fleeting second they met his. There was no anger in her gaze, no hatred, no triumph. There was nothing at all. Just a flicker of recognition, the kind one might give to a familiar piece of furniture in a room one no longer frequents. Then she turned back to Damian Blackwood, and Ethan Sterling ceased to exist. The Caroline Hayes who existed in Ethan's curated memory was a creature of spreadsheets and faded sweaters. Their story, as he now told it, began with his ambition and ended with her inability to keep pace. But the truth buried under years of self-serving revisionism was far different. They had met at Columbia Business School. He was the charismatic networker with a talent for presentations. She was the quiet genius who could deconstruct a complex financial instrument in her head. While Ethan was charming professors and building a social network, Caroline was winning scholastic awards and publishing a paper on predictive market algorithms that was years ahead of its time. They were a perfect pairing. He was the face, she was the engine. In their early years living in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment in Queens, that dynamic had been their strength. It was Caroline who stayed up until 3 a.m. refining the business plan for what would become their first venture, an analytics startup called Logos Analytics. It was her algorithm that formed the core of their product, a tool that could predict consumer behavior with uncanny accuracy. Ethan, with his polished charm, was the one who sold that vision to venture capitalists. He was brilliant at it, but he was selling her work. "We're a team." "Eth," she used to say, her eyes bright with passion as she sketched out code on a whiteboard. "You're the sails and I'm the rudder. Together we can go anywhere." And for a while they did. Logos. Analytics took off. They moved to a better apartment, then a loft in Tribeca. Ethan became the public face of the company, the celebrated young entrepreneur on magazine covers. Caroline preferred to stay in the background as the chief technology officer. She didn't crave the spotlight. She craved the work, the challenge of the problem. She believed in their shared dream. She believed in him. The first cracks appeared when Sterling and Finch made an offer to acquire Logos. It was a massive sum, a life-changing amount of money. But the deal came with the condition they wanted Ethan, the charismatic rainmaker, to join their firm as a vice president. They saw Caroline as a brilliant but replaceable technician. "They don't get it, Cara," Ethan had argued, pacing their pristine living room. "This is our entry. Once I'm inside, I can make sure they value your work. I can build a whole department around you. This is how we level up." Caroline was hesitant. "We'd be giving up our independence, Ethan. We'd be giving up our company. We'd be securing our future," he'd countered, his voice rising. "Don't you see this isn't a one-bedroom in Queens anymore? This is the big league. We have to be smart." He framed it as a strategic move for them, but it was the first time their ambitions had truly diverged. He wanted status, the validation of an established name. She wanted to continue building what they had started. In the end, her love for him and her trust in their partnership made her relent. She agreed to the sale. The money changed him. Or perhaps it simply revealed who he had been all along. The boy from Ohio was deeply insecure, and the vast wealth and access only amplified his need for external validation. He started spending lavishly on clothes, cars, and watches. He obsessed over being seen at the right restaurants with the right people. Caroline, who still found more joy in solving a complex coding problem than in a $1,000 dinner, began to feel like an anchor to a past he was desperate to outrun. He started making small cutting remarks. "That dress is a little academic, don't you think? Or you should let me do the talking at these events. Cara, you can get a bit lost in the technical details." He was subtly, systematically undermining her confidence, reframing her greatest strengths as social liabilities. Then came Chloe. She was an intern at the firm, bright-eyed and worshipful. She laughed at all of Ethan's jokes. She looked at him the way Caroline used to before the exhaustion and disillusionment set in. The affair was a textbook cliché. He started working late, taking business trips on weekends. Caroline wasn't naive, but she was loyal. She tried to believe his increasingly flimsy excuses, telling herself it was just the pressure of his new role. The discovery was brutal and cold. A credit card statement left on his desk detailing charges for a suite at the St. Regis and jewelry from Cartier purchases, made on a day he was supposedly in Chicago for a conference. The confrontation was ugly. He didn't even have the grace to be ashamed. He was defiant. "It's not working anymore, Caroline," he'd said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I've outgrown this. We've outgrown this. Outgrown this." She had whispered the words, feeling like shards of glass in her throat. "Ethan, we built this. Our life, the company. I wrote the code, I designed the architecture. And I sold it." He'd shot back, his face twisted with a resentment she had never seen before. "I made it palatable. You think men like Jonathan Beaumont want to hear about algorithms over brandy and cigars? "I made us rich, Caroline, and I need a partner who can help me navigate that world, not one who would rather be at home with a laptop." The divorce was even worse than the betrayal. He used the full power of Sterling and Finch's legal team against her. They argued that her intellectual contribution was salaried work, that the company's value was a result of his salesmanship and leadership. They buried her in paperwork, bled her dry with legal fees. Every clause in the acquisition contract, every line of their prenuptial agreement, which he had insisted upon, was weaponized against her. She emerged from the battle with her spirit shattered. He got the company the lion's share of their fortune, the loft, and the life they had built. She was left with a modest settlement, enough to prevent her from being destitute, but designed to ensure she would never again be his equal. She was erased from the story of her own success. The final cruelest blow came when he told her during their last meeting, "I'm doing you a favor, Kara. You were never cut out for this world. Go be happy being brilliant in a quiet room somewhere." For 6 months she drifted. The pain was a physical weight, a constant pressure on her chest. The man she had loved and trusted had not only left her, but had actively tried to destroy her, to negate her very worth. She looked in the mirror and saw the woman he had described drab, academic, a ghost from a past he had triumphantly escaped. The turning point came not with a dramatic epiphany, but with a quiet, stubborn spark of anger. It was the anger of a creator seeing her creation stolen and misused. She started following the news about her old company Logos, now a division within Sterling and Finch. She saw that under Ethan's sole leadership, its innovation had stalled. He was milking her old algorithms for profit, but wasn't creating anything new. He was a caretaker, not a visionary. That spark of anger ignited her intellect. She started coding again, not for a company, but for herself. She took the core ideas of her old work and began pushing them further into machine learning and AI-driven predictive analytics, areas Ethan had dismissed as too theoretical. She worked with a ferocity she hadn't felt in years, fueled by coffee and a burning need to prove him wrong, not to him, but to herself. She put her research on a private server, sharing it only with a few trusted academic colleagues. She didn't know that one of those colleagues occasionally played chess with a reclusive billionaire named Damian Blackwood. The colleague, impressed by her work, mentioned it during a game. "It's the most elegant application of AI to market forecasting I've ever seen," he'd said. "It's going to change everything." Damian Blackwood was a man who had built his empire by identifying and investing in foundational world-changing technologies before anyone else saw their potential. Intrigued, he asked for an introduction. Their first meeting was at a discreet hotel lounge in Midtown. Caroline was nervous, but the moment they started talking about her work, her anxiety vanished, replaced by the familiar thrill of intellectual engagement. Damian didn't ask about her divorce or her personal life. He asked about her models, her data sets, her vision for the future. He listened, truly listened, with an intensity that was both intimidating and exhilarating. He saw her not as Ethan's ex-wife, but as a singular, brilliant mind. "What you've built here, Ms. Hayes," he said, after 2 hours, his gray eyes fixed on hers, "is not an improvement on your old company. It's a quantum leap. Sterling and Finch has a product. You have a revolution." He paused, then delivered the words that would change her life. "I'm not interested in investing. I'm interested in being your partner. I will provide the capital, the infrastructure, and the political cover. You will provide the vision. We will build an empire, and you will be its queen." Back at the gala, the initial shockwave of Caroline's arrival began to subside, replaced by the churning, relentless currents of gossip and recalculation. The elite of New York were above all else transactional. Every relationship was an asset or a liability, and in the space of 10 minutes Caroline Hayes had gone from a forgotten footnote to the most valuable asset in the room. Ethan and Chloe were now on an invisible island. People who had been clamoring to speak with him minutes earlier now offered only tight, polite smiles as they angled themselves away, their trajectories mysteriously leading them towards the magnetic pull of Damian Blackwood's orbit. The social temperature around Ethan had dropped by 30 degrees. He was no longer a rising star. He was the man who had fumbled the sun. Gregory Shaw, a notoriously sharp-tongued hedge fund manager and a major rival to Sterling and Finch, made a point of walking directly past Ethan. He didn't even offer a nod. He strode up to Caroline and Damian, his voice booming for all to hear. "Blackwood." "I thought you'd gone into hibernation," Shaw exclaimed, shaking Damian's hand with exaggerated warmth. He then turned to Caroline, his eyes gleaming with a predator's delight. "And you must be the architect of the Phoenix project I've been hearing whispers about. My God, the rumors didn't do you justice." Gregory Shaw. Caroline took his hand, her grip firm. Caroline Hayes. "It's a pleasure, though I'm surprised any whispers have gotten out. We've been trying to keep things quiet." Her tone was light, but there was a subtle steel beneath it. It was a masterclass in deflection, confirming nothing while stoking the flames of intrigue. Ethan felt his blood run cold. Phoenix Project. What was Shaw talking about? The conversation was a dagger. Shaw was a major player, a man whose endorsement could move markets. His public and enthusiastic greeting of Caroline was a clear signal to everyone in the room she was the new power broker. By pointedly ignoring Ethan, he was also sending another more brutal message. "You are yesterday's news." Chloe, who had been silent for several minutes, finally spoke, her voice strained. "Ethan, what is he talking about? What is the Phoenix Project?" "I have no idea." Ethan snapped, his frustration boiling over. "It's probably nothing. Shaw is a theatrical idiot." But he knew it wasn't nothing. You didn't get the attention of both Damian Blackwood and Gregory Shaw with nothing. A sick feeling began to pool in his stomach. He had underestimated her. He had not just misjudged her social potential. He had completely, catastrophically failed to appreciate the scale of her intellect and her ambition. He had seen her as a supporting character in his story, never imagining she was capable of writing an epic of her own. He watched as Jonathan Beaumont finally managed to get a word with Damian. Ethan strained to hear, catching only snippets. Incredible disruption. A new paradigm. Sterling and Finch would be very interested in a strategic... Damian's reply was quiet, but carried a chilling finality. He gestured towards Caroline. "All strategic inquiries should be directed to Ms. Hayes. She is the CEO. This is her vision, not mine. I'm merely a facilitator." The words hit the surrounding listeners like a thunderclap. CEO. Not a girlfriend, not a trophy, not a consultant. CEO. The quiet academic woman Ethan had dismissed was the chief executive of a new venture backed by one of the most powerful investors on the planet, Beaumont. A man rarely caught off guard blinked once. He turned his full attention to Caroline, his expression shifting from polite curiosity to intense, focused respect. "Ms. Hayes," he began, his tone now one of a peer addressing another. "Perhaps we could schedule a meeting for next week." "Of course," Jonathan, Caroline replied, using his first name with an ease that infuriated Ethan. "Have your people call my people. We can see if there's a window." "Have your people call my people." It was the ultimate power phrase in their world, delivered with such casual authority that no one could doubt she belonged. Ethan felt a surge of possessive rage. His boss. His contacts. She was usurping his world using the very language he had once tried to teach her. Chloe's grip on his arm was now painfully tight. "CEO," she whispered, her voice a mixture of awe and horror. "Ethan, what did you do?" The question hung in the air between them, accusatory and unanswerable. What had he done? He had committed the cardinal sin in their world. He had miscalculated value. He had traded a priceless foundational asset for a speculative decorative one. He had traded a diamond mine for a glittering piece of glass. The whispers around them grew louder, the valuations more explicit. He left her for the intern. My God, that has to be the worst trade in Wall Street history. I heard he stripped her of all her equity in Logos. If that's true, she has every reason to burn his world to the ground. Burn it to the ground, darling. She's not going to burn it. She's going to buy it for parts and sell it for scrap. The laughter that followed that last comment was sharp and cruel. Ethan felt his face flush with heat. He wanted to flee, to drag Chloe out of the ballroom and away from the hundreds of judging eyes. But leaving now would be an admission of defeat. It would be a surrender. So he stood there, trapped on his island of irrelevance, forced to watch as the woman he had tried to erase became the center of the universe. He saw her speaking with a tech journalist from the Wall Street Journal, then with a senior analyst from Goldman Sachs. She was fluent, confident, moving seamlessly from discussions of market strategy to the technical nuances of her new platform. She was in her element. This, he realized with a sickening jolt, was the woman he had first met at Columbia, the brilliant, passionate visionary. He hadn't destroyed that woman. He had only suppressed her. And now, freed from the weight of his ego, she had re-emerged more powerful than he could have ever imagined. His gaze fell on Damian Blackwood again. The billionaire was watching Caroline, a subtle, proud smile on his face. It wasn't the possessive, gloating smile Ethan wore when he looked at Chloe. It was a smile of deep, genuine admiration. He wasn't her owner. He was her champion. The thought was somehow more infuriating than if they had been lovers. This wasn't about romance. It was about power, and Damian had recognized in Caroline a power that Ethan had been too blind to see. The orchestra had long since become background noise, a gentle soundtrack to the intense drama unfolding in hushed conversations. The real music of the night was the frantic symphony of whispers, the staccato rhythm of dawning realizations, and the crescendo of shifting allegiances. Ethan felt like a man watching his own execution, unable to stop the proceedings. Just when he thought the humiliation had peaked, Damian Blackwood subtly cleared his throat. It was not a loud gesture, but it had the effect of a gavel strike in a courtroom. The conversations in his immediate vicinity quieted. He hadn't raised his voice or sought a stage, but the room's attention contracted around him. "Jonathan," he said, addressing Ethan's boss directly. "Gregory." He nodded to the hedge fund rival. "Since so many of you are here, perhaps it's best to be transparent. It will save us all a great deal of time and speculation in the coming weeks." A circle of the most powerful people in the room had now formed around them, a silent, expectant audience. Ethan and Chloe were on the outside of this circle, close enough to hear but pointedly excluded from its embrace. Damian placed a hand lightly on Caroline's shoulder. "As some of you have heard, I have formed a new capital venture group. But it is not my venture. I am merely the primary investor. The company is called Phoenix Ascendant." The name itself sent a murmur through the crowd. The symbolism was as subtle as a sledgehammer, and it was aimed directly at Ethan. An entity rising from the ashes. Phoenix Ascendant. Damian continued, his voice calm and measured, is not another hedge fund. It is a technology-driven asset management firm built on a revolutionary predictive analytics platform. A platform that utilizes proprietary machine learning to anticipate market shifts with a 94% accuracy rate in our backtesting models. A collective intake of breath. 94% was an impossible number, a holy grail. If true, it wasn't just disruptive. It was an extinction-level event for firms that still relied on human analysis and older, less sophisticated algorithms, firms like Sterling and Finch. Firms that used the technology Caroline had created a decade ago. Ethan's mind raced. He knew the Logos algorithm inside and out. He knew its limitations. To get to 94%, she would have had to solve problems of data interpretation and predictive modeling that had stumped the greatest minds in the field. And he knew with a certainty that made him feel physically ill that she had done it. The platform, Damian said, his eyes scanning the faces of the stunned listeners, was developed from the ground up by the firm's founder and CEO, Caroline Hayes. He paused, letting the full weight of the statement land. He was not just introducing his date, he was anointing a new monarch. Caroline stepped forward slightly. She wasn't smiling. Her expression was one of cool, formidable seriousness. This was not a party for her. It was a boardroom. "Good evening," she began, her voice clear and steady, carrying easily through the rapt silence. For too long, the financial world has been running on legacy systems. Powerful, yes, but ultimately limited. We react to market trends instead of anticipating them. We are driving by looking in the rearview mirror. Phoenix Ascendant is the forward-facing view. She was so poised, so utterly in command. The timid librarian type from Ethan's memory was a figment of his own deluded imagination. This woman was a general addressing her troops and her future adversaries. Our platform, which we call Oracle, does not simply analyze past performance. It integrates global financial data, geopolitical intelligence, supply chain logistics, and even sentiment analysis from unstructured data sources in real time. It doesn't just tell you what happened. It tells you what is about to happen and why. Gregory Shaw let out a low whistle. That's not a company, Ms. Hayes. That's a license to print money. We believe it's the future of asset management, Caroline replied without a hint of arrogance. It was a statement of fact. And we are launching our flagship fund, the Ascendant Global Strategy Fund, in 2 weeks. Initial capitalization will be $10 billion. Another shockwave. $10 billion was a monumental launch. It was a declaration of war. It meant they wouldn't be starting small. They would be a major player from day one, capable of poaching top talent and targeting the largest institutional clients. Then came the final devastating blow. Caroline's eyes for the first time that evening deliberately sought out Ethan's. They moved past him, locking onto Jonathan Beaumont. I know Sterling & Finch has enjoyed great success with the Logos platform, she said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate, more lethal. It was a brilliant tool for its time. But its predictive models are by now nearly a decade old. It is, with all due respect, an analog tool in a digital age. She was discrediting her own creation, the very foundation of Ethan's success and his firm's profit center, branding it as a relic. We have already secured preliminary commitments from several large pension funds and sovereign wealth funds who understand the need to evolve, she continued. And I'm also pleased to announce that Dr. Eris Thorne, formerly the head of quantitative strategy at Sterling & Finch, will be joining Phoenix Ascendant next week as our chief investment officer. Ethan felt the floor drop out from under him. Eris Thorne. Thorne was their superstar quant, the only person at the firm who came close to understanding the math behind the Logos system. He was the future of the department. And Caroline had poached him. It wasn't just a business move. It was a personal surgical strike, removing a key pillar of his power base. Jonathan Beaumont's face was a mask of thunderous fury. He shot a look at Ethan, a look that conveyed pure, undiluted rage. How did you let this happen? How did you not know the unveiling was complete? It had been a public execution carried out with the precision of a master strategist. Caroline had not come to the gala for revenge. She had come to launch her empire. The fact that it was built upon the ashes of Ethan's world was simply a consequence of her ascent. It was business, the most personal, brutal business he could ever imagine. The circle broke. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were excited, frantic conversations. People were rushing to congratulate Caroline, to press their business cards into the hands of her new assistant, who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. The center of gravity in the financial world had just shifted, and everyone was scrambling to find their footing on the new landscape. Ethan stood frozen, watching the spectacle. He was no longer on an island. He was adrift in a hostile ocean, and the tide was rising fast. The journey home in the hired town car was a study in suffocating silence. The glittering lights of Manhattan blurred past the windows, but inside the vehicle the darkness was absolute. The triumphant energy of the evening had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, toxic residue. Ethan stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Chloe sat as far away from him as the leather seat would allow, her arms wrapped around herself, the magnificent Marchesa gown now feeling like a costume from a play that had ended in disaster. She was the first to break the silence. Her voice was flat, devoid of its usual melodic charm. You lied to me. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. I don't know what you're talking about, Ethan said, his voice a low growl. He was a cornered animal ready to lash out at any perceived threat. Don't you? Chloe's laugh was a brittle, ugly sound. The librarian-type Ethan. The quiet, simple woman who couldn't handle your world. That woman just held court with the most powerful people in the city and announced a $10 billion fund. That woman is a CEO. She didn't just handle your world. It looks like she's about to own it. It's a fluke, he snapped, turning to face her, his eyes wild. Blackwood is propping her up. It's some kind of vanity project, a way to get back at me. Chloe just stared at him, her blue eyes cold with a newfound clarity. Do you honestly believe that? Did you see the way those people looked at her? The way your own boss looked at her? They weren't looking at Damian Blackwood's girlfriend. They were looking at a peer, maybe even a superior. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. You told me you built that company logos from the ground up. You told me she was just support staff. But that was her algorithm, wasn't it? The one Sterling and Finch paid a fortune for. The one your entire career is based on. Ethan's defensive rage began to crumble, replaced by a desperate panic. She helped. We were a team. But I was the driving force. No, Chloe said, shaking her head slowly. You were the salesman. She was the genius. And you sold her out. You didn't just divorce her, you erased her, and you thought you'd get away with it. Her perception was terrifyingly accurate. She saw it all now. The lies he had told about Caroline were extensions of the lies he had told himself. His success wasn't his alone. It was built on a foundation he had stolen. And now the architect of that foundation had returned to build a skyscraper next to his crumbling bungalow. What does it matter, he spat, falling back on his last line of defense: money and status. We have a good life. I'm a senior VP. We have everything we could want. Do we? She challenged, her voice rising. Tonight I wasn't your wife. I was a prop. A symbol of your upgrade. And when your ex-wife walked in, more powerful, more elegant, and more respected than I could ever hope to be, what did that make me? The consolation prize. The runner-up. Everyone in that room was pitying me, Ethan. Pitying me for being with the fool who let the real prize go. The word struck him harder than any financial loss. He had seen Chloe as his ultimate trophy, a testament to his success. He had never considered how she might see herself. He had reduced her to an object, and now she was turning that objectification back on him. That's not true, he started, but she cut him off. Isn't it? Your boss is going to tear you apart tomorrow. Eris Thorne, your best quant, has abandoned you for her. Your biggest rival, Gregory Shaw, was practically bowing to her. And you stood there helpless, the king of a kingdom that turned out to be made of cardboard. The car pulled up to their gleaming residential tower in Soho. The doorman rushed to open the door, but neither of them moved. The fight wasn't over. So what is this all about, Chloe? Ethan sneered, a desperate cruelty creeping into his tone. Are you upset because my ex-wife is successful, or are you just realizing you bet on the wrong horse? A single tear traced a path through Chloe's perfect makeup. Maybe both, she admitted, her voice cracking. I thought you were a builder, Ethan. A creator, but you're not. You're just a taker. You took her ideas, you took her company, and you tried to take her dignity. And tonight, I saw what a woman looks like when she takes it all back. And I realized, I don't respect you. She finally opened the car door and got out, not waiting for him. She walked into the building without a backward glance, her diamond white gown looking like a shroud in the dim light of the lobby. Ethan remained in the car, the engine humming softly. Her words echoed in the silence. I don't respect you. It was a more profound rejection than the one he had given Caroline. He had left Caroline for reasons of ambition and ego. Chloe's rejection was based on a fundamental assessment of his character. She had seen behind the curtain and found nothing there. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Jonathan Beaumont. It contained only 5 words. My office. 7 a.m. Don't be late. The tone was glacial. It wasn't a request. It was a summons to his own execution. He knew what the meeting would be about. He would be asked how he, the man who was once married to Caroline Hayes, had been completely blindsided by the formation of a $10 billion competitor that had just poached their top talent. He would be asked why he hadn't leveraged his connection to get Sterling and Finch a piece of the action. He would be asked to explain the now obvious liability of their entire division being based on outdated technology created by the CEO of their new, most dangerous rival. He had no answers. His greatest asset, his history with Caroline, had become his greatest liability. He had brought his new wife to the gala to celebrate his arrival to cement his place at the top. Instead, he had been unmasked. The facade had cracked and the man underneath was small, frightened, and utterly, completely alone. The grand ballroom had not been his coronation. It had been his public autopsy. The rest of the gala was a blur for Caroline, transforming from a party into the unofficial launch of Phoenix Ascendant. She moved through the crowd with a calm that felt both innate and hard-won, no longer anyone's ex-wife but a CEO in her own right. Later, on a quiet terrace with Damian, he asked what she felt seeing Ethan. The triumph she once imagined was absent. Honestly, she confessed, her voice steady, I felt very little. It was like looking at a photograph from a different lifetime. He didn't break me, Damian. He revealed me. The betrayal had stripped away everything but her essential self, a self she'd buried to make their life work. She felt a strange sense of gratitude, not bitterness. Theirs was not a relationship of romance, but of a rare mutual respect. He hadn't tried to possess her genius, only to empower it. Her gaze found Ethan one last time across the room. He stood alone, a diminished figure. There was no pity in her eyes, only clinical closure. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a final farewell, before turning her back on him forever. The story of that night would become a legend, a cautionary tale of hubris. But for Caroline, it was already history. The next morning, she was at her office by 6 a.m., ready to build her new dawn. The story of Caroline Hayes is a powerful reminder that our greatest strength is often forged in the fires of our deepest betrayals. Ethan Sterling thought success was about perception, about wearing the right suit and having the right wife on your arm. But he learned the hard way that true power isn't about the facade you build, it's about the foundation you own. Caroline didn't win by seeking revenge. She won by rediscovering her own value and building an empire so magnificent that her past became an insignificant shadow. Her story teaches us that the ultimate victory is not in tearing someone else down, but in building yourself up to a height they can no longer reach. What did you think of Caroline's incredible comeback? Was Ethan's downfall deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of resilience and triumph, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own inner power. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story about the people who refuse to be broken.